Hello and welcome to the final chapter of our Flux Evo Channel video series. I'm your host Jerry Mateo, and in this chapter we're going to finish off what we started in the last chapter by mixing all the other elements that are in this mix. In the last chapter I really focused on mixing the drums, so we're going to use all of the same tools and tricks that we used in the last chapter for the piano, guitar, and bass. Let's get started by taking a quick listen to the way that this track sounds one more time. We'll start it somewhere in the middle so we can hear it at a more active part. So it sounds pretty good. I do hear a couple of problems right off the bat though. Let me take this down. If I find a spot where the bass and the guitar are playing pretty much the same parts, like around here, and I solo them both up, you might not really hear the problem that I'm hearing, but I'm noticing that that coupled with the piano are causing some low-end buildup. And it's not really sounding the way I want it to sound. So we're going to need to find a way to tame the frequencies that are resonating in the guitar, so that way the bass can fill up the low end of pretty much the entire mix. So besides that, I think we're pretty good to go. Let's start off by mixing the acoustic guitar though. I'm going to start off by listening to how it sounds, maybe right around here. That sounds really good. I'm hearing a little bit too much low end, but I'm also hearing a resonant frequency coming in. Right there. You can hear it almost feed back into itself. So I'm going to make the analyzer very, very sharp and hide the equalizer. I think you can see it right around here. Let's make this extremely tight. Okay, and I'm going to hold shift and bring this down a whole 24 decibels. Now we can hear that it's still there, so let's try to get rid of it even more. Notice that we're cutting quite a bit of high end though. So to counteract this, I'm going to do two things. One, I'm going to increase the harmonic content by utilizing the drive section. Now that is going to bring back that problem frequency, which is not going to be that much of a problem because we're just going to cut it more. But we're also getting a much thicker sound. Let me bypass the plugin. And with the back on. And then I'm going to use the high shelf to do just about a dB or two of high frequency lift, starting from about 3K or so. Next, I'm going to want to tame the transient of this low frequency content right here. It's at about 150 hertz or so. So for that, we're going to utilize the touch control because we're using a lot of cuts for the high end. Let's try using something different for the low end. We're going to change the touch mode to transient kill and move it to about 100 hertz. Right around here. Let's listen to it. So it's looking like it's primarily in the 200 hertz range. So we're just going to dial this back to hit primarily those frequencies. And now watch what happens. We're just going to turn the amount all the way up. Bypass. It instantly cleans up the low end, but we're doing it too aggressively for my taste. So I'm going to back it down to about 41% and increase the release to about 100 milliseconds. Now we're also hearing another resonant frequency coming in now, so we're going to make this have a nice big tight Q, and let's sweep around till we find it. We can hear it right there. I hold shift, bring this down. That sounds pretty good right off the bat. And you notice how fast and easy it is to analyze and view where these problems are because I'm able to adjust the overall spectrum analysis. If I have it all the way to smooth, it looks more like a mastering view, but if I have it super sharp, I can see exactly where the resonant frequencies are. We want to do one more thing though, and that's clean up the low end. So we're going to use the filter for the low frequency, and I'm going to make this a 24 decibel octave slope. We'll hide this. And what we're going to do is we're going to slide in and out until we start hearing it cutting out the low end, and then we'll back it off just a little bit. So here we go. Right there, you can really hear it. So we can hear it still cutting off some low end frequency content, but it sounds much cleaner. So I'm just going to adjust the curve to be an 18 dB octave slope instead of a 24. Let's bypass the Evo channel. And turn it back on. Much better. Now next I want to use some compression, but for this I want to use some parallel compression. So we're going to set this to acoustic and make this do quite a bit of gain reduction. You can hear it's pumping quite a bit. That's not that big of a deal. I'm just going to reduce the release time. And this has made it a little bit more pumpy, and I'm doing that on purpose. We're going to bring back the gain. And now we're going to use the dry wet slider to dial this in. Let's bypass the plugin once again. And we're going to reduce the output gain. Bypass it one more time. What I'm trying to do is keep the same input and output gain so that we don't have a level difference. That sounds good. Let's take a listen to this in the mix. Now let's bypass it. Notice that when I turn it on and off while it's playing, you're starting to hear it cut in and out. That's because when it's bypassed, it's a little duller, but it still has a lot of resonant frequencies in the mid-range and the high end. And then when it's turned back on, we end up getting a brighter sound without all that resonant frequency content. So we're able to have this stand out of the mix. So I think that's done. Let's move on to this grand piano. The grand piano is a print of easy keys, so it should sound really good right off the bat. Let's listen to it. It sounds really, really good. The only thing I'm going to do is maybe clean up just a little bit of the low end and add a little bit of high frequencies. And let's get rid of a little bit of the transient on the low frequencies. So we'll do a transient killer. And this will just help it not really get in the way of the bass. Right there. And we're only going to do about 5 or 6%. And we'll increase the release so it doesn't pump. And I want to get rid of just a little bit of a mid-range bump that I'm hearing. Let's actually set the analyzer to be very smooth so we can see it. Right there. Now the reason why I had the analyzer really smooth is because I want this to be a tonal balance shift. So let's bypass this. And let's turn it back on. Notice how we're not hearing that much of a change. It's basically just cleaning up the frequencies that are building up a tiny bit, because in the mix, that's where it's going to stand out. Now, there is one more thing I want to do though, and that is compress it. We're going to set this to piano, bring down the makeup gain, and again, we're going to utilize the wet-dry mix. So let's do quite a bit of aggressive compression. Let's bypass it. And let's find a louder part, maybe right here. Notice how our output gain needs to be compensated a little bit more. The reason why I'm not going to do that is because I'm going to add just a little bit of drive. I'm going to be honest with you. I think you should just add drive to everything. It sounds better. We'll start off at 40%. Bypassed. And back on. It just sounds really, really good. So let's take this out of solo and we'll play it from right around here and we'll have it bypass and then I'll bring it in. So here we go. Bypass it. Notice how when I have it bypass, we lose that impact. I'm also noticing that I boosted a little bit too much high end on the acoustic guitar, so we're just going to kill that high frequency lift. And let's see how this sounds. That sounds perfect to me. Next, we have the bass guitar. Now, this is going to be a little bit tricky because this is a DI bass that has a little bit of a dull sound. Let's listen to it. So what I want to do with this is maybe find a section where it's playing a little bit more. And we're going to utilize the drive section, but we're going to do this a little bit differently than we've been doing this. I'm going to crank this all the way up. I'm going to bring down my output gain, and I'm going to just start cranking it until I start hearing some crazy distortion. Like that. Bypass it. Notice how we have a much more aggressive tone now. Now that we have that, we're actually going to crank it more. And then I'm going to bring down the drive. And we'll bypass this. Notice how that sticks out a lot more, even though it's a lot more distorted. It kind of sounds like it's more aggressive, which is pretty interesting because when you do a lot of distortion, you're actually compressing the signals. So it's not going to have as much dynamics, but because it's very natural saturation, it kind of sounds like we have some impact. So I'm just going to bring down my makeup gain just a tiny bit. Bypass. Just a little bit more. And the reason why I'm not fully gain compensating is because this is very compressed now. So we don't actually have to gain compensate as much because at its loudest peaks, it's actually quieter than those. Like that went a little bit louder than when it was out of bypass. Next, what I want to do is bring down the drive just a little bit more. Just so we can clean it up. And now I want to dial in the amount of compression first. I'm going to do this before the equalizer. So I'm going to go into my signal flow, make the compressor first. And now I'm going to do some bass compression. We're going to go for about 12 dBs of gain reduction. Have the makeup gain and then use the dry wet slider. Just a little bit. And now we can actually bring up the output gain again. We'll bypass it. Now in solo, this sounds a little bit too aggressive, right? It doesn't exactly sound good, but check out what happens if I take it out of solo and play it in the mix. We'll have it bypass and then I'll turn it back on. And now back on. The only thing you really notice about the saturation is now you can actually hear the bass guitar instead of just barely feeling it. This is great because you don't hear all that saturation, but we're getting a lot more attack, a lot more body, and a lot more of a full sound, even though we're actually just adding a lot of distortion and compressing it like crazy. So technically, we're reducing the dynamics and we're reducing the amount of impact it has. But because it's being done in a very creative way, we perceive it as adding to it. So next, what I want to do is have a little bit of a touch control, and I'm going to just use this on the low frequencies, and I'm going to use the transient boost. This is going to be done only 2%. We're going to have a relatively slow release at about 200 or so. And this is literally just to add the tiniest bit of transient attack to that initial hit in the low end. With the bypass. So let's try to add about 6% more. You still barely hear it doing anything. For me, I think we're going to go in the middle and go to 4. With it bypassed. It's almost not perceivable, but to be honest, on my setup, I can just barely hear it poking out a little bit more. And that's what I want to do. Now that we've done all of this processing, I want to EQ it. But I want to EQ this after all of this. So I'm going to move my filters and EQ sections to the back of the signal flow so that they're doing things last. I'm also going to move my equalizer before the filter. That way I can do a lot of crazy EQing and just filter things out at the end to kind of tame them and put them back into place. So the first thing I'm going to do, boost up the low end by a lot. And now I'm going to use the low cut filter to filter it back down. Bypass. And back in. I can bring this down quite a bit. And we'll have this low cut at 45 Hertz. And we'll make this a 12 dB octave slope. That way we maintain a little bit of that low end. Next, I'm going to have a pretty tight Q, and I'm going to find a ugly frequency in the lower mid-range and then boost something up in the higher mid-range and then cut out anything past about 10K. So let's get started. Now let's boost up a little bit of upper mid-range. And lastly, I want to get rid of any excess high end that might have a little bit of fizziness to it. And now let's bypass it. We're going to bring down the output gain. And let's take a listen to this in the mix without the Evo channel. Here we go. And with it on. Let's turn it off. It just adds that subtle amount of saturation and compression that it helps it cut through. Notice that when I had it bypassed right now, it just kind of sounded bland. You didn't really hear it that much. Now, I think we can back off on the filter a tiny bit more just to add some more low end. And I'm going to move this back up to 24 dB octave slope. I'm going to increase the low shelf filter by about a dB. And then I'm going to keep the amount at 2 for the touch, but I'm going to try to compensate by having the touch before the compressor. Let's try this. Bypass. I'm going to have a little bit more drive added just because I'm finding that it's starting to sound too clean. There we go, that's perfect. Now let's take a listen to this in the mix, bypassed, and then we'll bring it back in. And now back in. I did a couple of adjustments by changing the location of the low cut filter or the high pass filter, but I think we're done. This sounds pretty cool. Let's do one last thing and let's process the submix using just the compressor section inside of the Evo channel, but we're going to focus on the mix mode, which is a mode that we haven't even touched yet. So let's just see what it looks like. Pretty subtle. I'm going to change the ratio to 2.3. And let's just dial this in. It's a very, very subtle amount of compression. I really like this. So now that we've done that, let's pin this and let's highlight all of our tracks except for our reverbs. And what we're going to do is bypass every instance of Evo channel. And then we're going to turn it back on while it's playing. Find a nice section where everything's playing right here. And we're going to bypass the Evo channel. And let's see what it sounds like right now. Let's turn it back on. It has a lot more life and a lot more movement, and the only thing we used in this entire session was the Evo channel. The only things that weren't Evo channel were my reverbs. So with that said, I think we're done here. That's going to conclude this series on the Flux Evo channel. I hope you enjoyed, and I hope to see you again soon. This is Jerry Mateo, and I will see you next time. Bye.